The smell hit him before anything else. Not perfume, not cologne. Something chemical buried deep under the broth, sweet in a way that broth should never be sweet. Jin-Soo Park sat at his private table in the back room of Hyundai Kitchen, a chopstick halfway to his mouth, and froze. He didn't eat it. He put the chopstick down, pushed the bowl away, and stared at it for a long time. Nobody saw him do that. The waitress had already left the room. The door was closed. It was just him and a bowl of soup that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else's life. That was a Thursday. By the following Monday, he would know exactly who had been trying to kill him, and by the end of that week, the woman responsible would lose everything she had ever built. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's back up. Jin-Soo Park was not the kind of man you'd look twice at on the street. Average height, kept his hair short, wore plain dark suits that cost more than most people's rent, but didn't scream for attention. That was the point. In the world of organized crime in Seoul, the ones who lasted were never the loud ones. Jin-Soo had been running his network since he was 32. He was 46 now. 14 years of building something that operated quietly, efficiently, and brutally when it needed to be brutal. His empire wasn't flashy. No nightclubs with his name on the door. No yachts in Busan Harbor. What Jin-Soo owned was invisible. Real estate, shipping routes, and a reputation that moved through certain circles like electricity through water. People who needed things moved. Things that couldn't go through normal channels. See, Jin-Soo made that happen. And he did it well enough that the people who paid him never had to think about it again. He had money, a lot of it, but he lived like a man who understood that attention was the real enemy. His apartment was in Gangnam, a penthouse that looked out over the city, but the furniture was sparse and the kitchen was barely used. He ate out most nights, not at expensive restaurants where businessmen gathered to be seen. He ate at places that were good, places where the food was real and the owners didn't ask questions. Hyundai Kitchen was one of those places. It was in a part of Seoul that tourists didn't stumble into. The restaurant had 30 seats, no signage beyond a small wooden plaque by the door, and a chef who had been cooking Korean food for 40 years without ever trying to be famous. Jin-Soo had been coming here for 6 years. He had a standing reservation, a private room in the back, separated from the main dining area by a sliding door. Every night he came, he ordered the same thing, a specific set of dishes, always starting with doenjang jjigae, fermented soybean paste stew, made the way the chef's mother taught him. It was one of the very few things in Jin-Soo's life that had nothing to do with power or control. It was just good food, a quiet hour, a way to decompress before he went back to being the person everyone else needed him to be. Every night the meal was prepared. Every night the tray was brought to his private room by one of the waitstaff. And every night Jin-Soo ate alone in silence and felt for a little while like a regular man. Sana, the problem was that the meal Jin-Soo was eating was not the meal Jin-Soo was ordering. Nobody noticed. Not at first. The swap was clean, surgical even. The contaminated dish looked identical to the original. Same bowl, same garnish, same steam rising from the surface. The only difference was invisible, dissolved into the liquid in amounts too small to taste. The person responsible for the swap was not at Hyundai Kitchen. She was across the city in an apartment that cost more per square meter than most buildings in Seoul, sitting in a living room decorated with flowers that were replaced every 2 days by a service that charged more for the arrangement than most people spent on groceries in a month. Yuna Park, Jin-Soo's wife. They had been married for 8 years. She was 38. Beautiful in a way that people noticed immediately and forgot to question. High cheekbones, pale skin, the kind of composure that looked effortless but was the result of years of careful cultivation. She came from money, not mafia money, old money, the kind of wealth that had been in her family for generations, tied to land and banking, and a reputation that carried weight in rooms where Jin-Soo's name would have gotten someone escorted out. When Yuna married Jin-Soo, people in her circle whispered. Some of them stopped talking to her entirely. She didn't care, or at least she performed not caring so convincingly that nobody could tell the difference. What she got from the marriage was something her family's money couldn't buy. Protection. Jin-Soo's world moved in ways that legitimate business couldn't touch. Inam and Yuna understood power well enough to recognize that Jin-Soo had more of it than anyone she had ever met. What Jinsu got from the marriage was simpler. He got a partner, someone who could stand next to him in rare social situations where his world overlapped with the legitimate one. Someone who ran the household and never asked questions she wasn't supposed to ask. For a man who lived in shadows, Yuna was the one surface he could present to the world. For the first few years it worked, not beautifully, not the way marriages work in films. It was an arrangement that both parties honored because it served them both. Jinsu was not a romantic man. Yuna didn't expect him to be. She had her own life, her charity appearances, her social calendar, her investments managed through separate accounts that Jinsu never looked at. One where they occupied the same space without ever colliding. But somewhere in the last 2 years, something shifted. Nobody could say exactly when it started, because it started quietly, the way most dangerous things do. Yuna began paying attention to where Jinsu ate, when he ate, how the meals were delivered. She mapped his routine the way an intelligence operative would map a target's movements, methodically, patiently, without ever letting Jinsu see her doing it. The reason was money, specifically the transfer of it. Jinsu's wealth was structured in layers, each one designed to be invisible to the one before it. Yuna had access to the surface layer, the legitimate accounts, the property holdings, the business fronts. But the deeper layers, the ones where the real money lived, were locked behind systems and relationships that only Jinsu could activate. If Jinsu died, those layers didn't automatically transfer to her. They dispersed to associates, to offshore structures, to people Yuna had never met and couldn't find. She had consulted lawyers, discreetly. The answer was always the same. Jinsu's estate planning was designed to disappear upon his death, not consolidate. For Yuna to inherit anything meaningful, Jinsu would need to die in a way that was slow enough for certain documents to be activated, certain accounts to be redirected, and certain people to be paid off before the system collapsed. Slow. That was the key word. A sudden death would trigger fail-safes. An accident would be investigated. But a prolonged illness, something that looked natural, is something that gave Yuna time to work behind the scenes while Jinsu faded. That was the window. Arsenic, the poison of choice for centuries precisely because it mimics natural illness. Stomach problems, gradual weight loss, fatigue, organ damage that presents as something chronic. Yuna didn't get it herself. She wasn't careless enough to leave that kind of trail. She used a middleman, a man named Tae-kyung, someone who had done work for her family before, who knew how to source things without asking why. The compound was odorless, tasteless in small doses, and slow enough that months could pass before a doctor started looking in the right direction. The delivery method was elegant in its simplicity. Jinsu ate at Handy Kitchen every night. The meal was always the same. The routine never changed. All Yuna needed was a way to introduce the poison into the food after it left the kitchen and before it reached Jinsu's table. Tae-kyung handled that. He found a way into the restaurant's delivery process. Not the kitchen itself. That would have been too risky. Instead, he intercepted the tray after it was prepared and before it reached the private room. A 30-second window. Enough time to add a specific amount of the compound to the stew. The one dish Jinsu always ate first and always finished completely. The rest of the meal was left untouched. Jinsu always started with the soup. It was the one thing he never deviated on. This had been happening for 3 months. 3 months of slow poisoning. Jinsu's blood pressure spiked. He started feeling exhausted by mid-afternoon. His appetite dropped. He attributed it to stress. And he didn't go to the doctor because men like Jinsu didn't go to doctors unless they were already bleeding out. But that Thursday, something was off. Maybe Yuna had pushed the dose slightly higher than usual. Maybe Jinsu's senses had sharpened because his body was already under siege, and some primal part of him was finally paying attention. Whatever the reason, he stopped eating. He pushed the bowl away. He sat there for 10 minutes, staring at it, and then he left without finishing his meal. That night he called Sung-ho, his most trusted man, the one person in his organization who knew everything. "I need you to test something for me," Jinsu said. His voice was flat, not panicked. Jinsu didn't panic, but there was something underneath the flatness, something cold and very, very still. What kind of something? Sung-ho asked. Ask food. I'll have it sent to you tomorrow. I need to know exactly what's in it. All of it. All of it. Sung-ho didn't ask why. He had known Jin-soo long enough to recognize the tone. Something had broken open. And when something broke open in Jin-soo's world, the people responsible didn't get second chances. But here's the part of this story that nobody predicted. Because while Jin-soo was sitting in that private room, pushing away a bowl of poisoned soup, someone else in that restaurant had already figured out what was happening. Someone who had been watching for weeks. Someone who had no connection to Jin-soo's world, no reason to protect him, and every reason to mind her own business. Her name was Amara Osai. She was 28 years old, born in Accra, Ghana. She came to Seoul 3 years earlier on a student visa that had since expired, though the paperwork keeping her legal was complicated enough that neither she nor anyone else could explain it simply. She worked at Hyundai Kitchen 5 nights a week. She was a waitress, not the head waitress, not someone important in the hierarchy of the restaurant. She carried trays, took orders, wiped tables, and went home at 11 o'clock at night to a small apartment in Mapo-gu that she shared with 2 other women who worked in different industries and asked each other nothing about their days. Amara was not supposed to be paying attention to Jin-soo Park. She didn't know who he was. Not really. She knew he was the man in the back room, the one who came every night, the one who tipped well and never spoke to her beyond a nod when she brought the food. However, she knew his order by heart because she had carried it dozens of times. What Amara noticed, because Amara noticed things, it was simply part of how she moved through the world, was that the tray didn't always come from the kitchen at the same time. Most nights, the chef finished the private order, the tray was assembled, and one of the staff carried it straight to the back room. 5 minutes, maybe 6, from kitchen to table. But some nights, there was a gap. 10 minutes, 15. The tray would sit in the hallway near the service entrance, and during that gap, someone would come and go. Not a staff member, someone Amara didn't recognize. A man in a gray jacket who moved through the back corridor like he knew exactly where he was going and exactly how long he could stay. The first time she saw him, she thought nothing of it. Restaurants have suppliers, delivery people. The second time, she paid closer attention. He wasn't carrying anything in or out. He was standing next to the tray for about 20 seconds. Then he left. The third time, Amara watched from the end of the hallway. She kept her back against the wall, a cloth in her hand like she was cleaning, and she watched him open a small container and add something to the soup. It took less than 10 seconds. He stirred it once with a small spoon, put the spoon back, closed the container, and walked out. Amara stood there for a long time after he left. The tray sat in the hallway, untouched otherwise. The soup looked exactly the same as it always did. Nothing wrong with it to the naked eye. She didn't know what he had added. She didn't know why. But she knew what it looked like when someone was being poisoned. She had seen it before, not in Seoul, not in this life, but years ago, back in Ghana, in a situation she didn't talk about to anyone. She knew the shape of it, the patience, the invisibility, the way it was always disguised as something else. And she knew that if she did nothing, the man in the back room was going to die. So she made a decision, not a dramatic one, not the kind of decision that gets made in movies with swelling music. It was quiet, practical, the kind of decision ordinary people make when they see something wrong and calculate, very quickly, whether they can fix it without drawing attention to themselves. She could tell someone, the chef, the owner, someone who could investigate, but that would mean explaining how she knew. Which would mean revealing that she had been watching the hallway, which would mean questions she didn't want to answer. Questions about her immigration status, questions about why she hadn't said something sooner, questions that could unravel the carefully maintained invisibility that kept her safe in a country that was not her own. Or she could fix it herself, quietly, without anyone knowing. Amara chose the second option, and that quiet, deliberate choice, made by a woman nobody in Jin-soo's world would have looked at twice, was about to change everything. Before we go any further, I need to say something. If this story is hitting the way I think it's hitting, you already know where this is going. And honestly, I want to hear from you. Drop your city in the comments right now. I love seeing where you all are tuned in from. Seoul, Lagos, Tokyo, London, wherever you are, let me know. But here's the real question. After you hear what this woman did, what Yuna did sitting in her high-rise apartment with her fresh flowers and her lawyers, orchestrating all of this from a distance, I want to know what you would have done if you were Amara. Because Amara had every reason to look the other way. Every single reason. And she didn't. So tell me, what would you have done? Put your answer in the comments along with your city. I'm reading every single one. Now let's get back into it. The next night Tae-kyung came, Amara was ready. She had spent the afternoon in the kitchen memorizing the exact composition of the doenjang jjigae, the ingredients, the proportions, the way it was ladled into the bowl. The chef didn't mind her watching. He thought she was interested in learning to cook. She let him think that. When the tray was assembled and placed in the hallway, Amara waited. Tae-kyung came. He did what he always did. Opened the case, added the substance, stirred, left. Amara counted to 60 after he disappeared around the corner. Then she walked to the tray, picked up the bowl of contaminated soup, carried it quietly to the kitchen, and replaced it with a fresh bowl she had prepared herself using the chef's recipe, which she had copied exactly. The chef was in the back, cleaning the grill. He didn't see her do it. The contaminated bowl she disposed of in the restaurant's waste bin, buried under other food scraps where no one would look twice. The man in the back room ate his meal that night without knowing anything had changed. The soup tasted exactly the same. It's because it was exactly the same, minus the poison. Amara did this 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. Each time Tae-kyung came. Each time he added something to the soup. Each time Amara swapped the bowl before it reached the private room. She was careful. She never rushed. She never let anyone see her do it. She carried the contaminated food away like it was garbage, which in a sense it was. She didn't tell anyone. Not her roommates, not the chef, not Jin-soo Park himself. She just kept doing it night after night, and she kept watching, and she kept waiting. Because Amara understood something that most people in this story did not. She understood that the people who poison others always make one mistake. They assume no one is paying attention. They assume their invisibility only works in one direction. Nama, they were wrong about that. Now, while Amara was quietly saving Jin-soo's life from inside the restaurant, something else was happening on the outside. Jin-soo had sent the soup to Sung-ho for testing. And Sung-ho, being the kind of man who didn't waste time when Jin-soo asked him to move, had it analyzed within 48 hours. The results came back on a Saturday morning. Sung-ho called Jin-soo from a phone that couldn't be traced. "You were right to be suspicious," Sung-ho said. "How bad?" "Arsenic. Sodium arsenite specifically. The concentration in the sample you sent was high enough to cause significant organ damage over weeks. If you'd been eating this regularly for the amount of time I think you have been, your kidneys would be failing right about now." Jin-soo was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice hadn't changed. It was the same flat, controlled tone it always was. But Sung-ho had known him long enough to hear the thing underneath it. The thing that wasn't anger exactly. It was colder than anger. It was the sound of a man who had just found out that the person closest to him in the world had been trying to erase him from it. "I need to know who," Jin-soo said. "Already working on it. The source of the poison is traceable if we move fast enough. I have people who can pull that thread tonight." "Do it!" Sung-ho hung up. Jin-soo sat in his apartment in the sparse living room with the view of the city, and he didn't move for a very long time. The thing about men like Jin-soo is that people assume they're always thinking about revenge, that the moment they find out they've been betrayed, one of the first thing that fires in their brain is retaliation, and sometimes that's true. But not always. Sometimes the first thing that fires is grief. Because before you can be angry at someone for trying to destroy you, you have to reckon with the fact that they wanted to destroy you in the first place. And that reckon, that moment where you sit with the full weight of what that means, is quieter than people think. Jin-soo had trusted Yuna. Not completely, not the way you trust someone you love, but he had trusted her enough to let her into his space, his routine, his life. He had trusted her to be what he needed her to be, and she had used that trust to kill him, slowly, deliberately. from the comfort of an apartment he paid for. It using a method she had researched and planned and executed with the same careful attention she brought to everything else in her carefully curated existence. He sat with that for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called Sung-ho again. "When you find out who's behind this," Jin-soo said, "don't touch them. Not yet. I want to know everything first, every detail, who she talked to, where she got the poison, how long this has been going on. I want to know exactly how much she's already moved in terms of money and assets. I want the full picture before anything happens." "Understood," Sung-ho said. "And Sung-ho, yeah? This stays between us. Nobody else in the organization knows about this. Nobody." "Of course." Jin-soo hung up and went back to staring at the city. Meanwhile, Il-yuna was having dinner with a woman named Mrs. Choi, the wife of a prominent Seoul businessman whose family had connections to several of the same banking circles Yuna's family had used for decades. They were at a restaurant in Itaewon, one of those places where the menu didn't have prices because the clientele didn't need to see them. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, the kind of ambient lighting that made everyone look better than they deserved to. Yuna was in good form that evening. She laughed at the right moments. She asked Mrs. Choi about her children with genuine seeming interest. She ordered wine that she knew Mrs. Choi would enjoy. She was performing, as she always performed, with the precision of someone who had spent decades learning exactly how to be the person the room expected her to be. But underneath the performance, when Yuna was running calculations, Jin-soo had been taking the poison for 3 months now. The timeline she had worked out with the doctors she had consulted, discreetly under false names, suggested that significant organ failure would begin presenting within the next 4 to 6 weeks. By that point, he would be hospitalized. By that point, Yuna would already have begun the quiet process of activating the financial structures that would redirect his deeper assets toward accounts she controlled. She had already started small moves, conversations with the right people, favors called in, the kind of financial maneuvering that happened in whispers, not on paper, in the spaces between legitimate banking and the shadow economy that Jin-soo himself had built. Yuna understood that world better than most people gave her credit for. She had spent 8 years studying it from the inside. Everything was on schedule. Jin-soo was getting weaker. The poison was doing its work. And Yuna was positioning herself to catch whatever wealth she could before the system dispersed it. She didn't know that the poison had stopped working. She didn't know that someone in the restaurant had been swapping the contaminated food for clean versions of the same dish. She didn't know that Jin-soo had already figured out something was wrong and had the evidence in the hands of people who would dismantle her world piece by piece. She didn't know any of it, and that was her fatal mistake. Not the poisoning itself, not the planning. The mistake was assuming she was the only one paying attention. The next morning, Sung-ho called Jin-soo with a name. "Tae-kyung," he said. "He's the one who's been going into the restaurant. We have him on camera from a security feed across the street. He's connected to the Cho family, Yuna's family." Jin-soo didn't react. Not visibly. Not in any way that Sung-ho could detect over the phone. "How connected?" Jin-soo asked. "He's done work for them before. Private security, discreet errands. The kind of jobs that don't get written down anywhere." "And the poison, can we trace it back to her directly?" "Not yet, but Tae-kyung can. If we bring him in, he'll talk. Men like him always do when the alternative is made clear enough." "Bring him in," Jin-soo said. "Tonight, quietly." "And then," Jin-soo paused. When he spoke again, there was something in his voice that Sung-ho had only heard a handful of times in 14 years. It wasn't anger. It was something more deliberate than anger. "Then we take our time." Tae-kyung was taken that evening. It happened fast and clean, the way Jin-soo's people always operated. No scene, no drama. One moment Tae-kyung was walking to his car in a parking garage in Uedo. The next moment he was in the back of a van, and the van was moving, and nobody on the street had seen a thing. He talked within 2 hours. Not because he was brave or loyal to anyone. He talked because the men in that room made it very clear, very quickly, what the alternative looked like. Tae-kyung gave them everything. The source of the arsenic compound, the number of times he had made the delivery, the exact dosage Yuna had specified, the payment structure, the timeline she had laid out for him, and the name. He confirmed it without hesitation when they asked him directly. Yuna Park, his employer's wife, the woman who had hired him 6 months ago at a cafe in Cheongdam-dong over coffee that cost more than his hourly rate, and told him exactly what she needed done and exactly how much she would pay him to do it. Sung-ho called Jin-soo with the full report at midnight. Jin-soo listened to every detail without interrupting. When Sung-ho finished, there was a long silence on the line. "I want her watched," Jin-soo said finally. 24 hours a day. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to, everything she does. But I don't want her to know she's being watched. I want her to keep living her life exactly the way she's been living it. I want her to feel safe." "For how long?" Sung-ho asked. "Surely until she thinks she's won." Sung-ho understood. He had seen this before. Jin-soo didn't believe in quick justice. He believed in the kind of justice that waited until the person on the receiving end had fully convinced themselves that they had gotten away with it. The kind that landed hardest precisely because it came from the direction no one was looking. Yuna had no idea what was coming. She was still sitting in her apartment, still planning her next moves, still calculating timelines and asset transfers. She still believed Jin-soo was dying. She still believed she was in control. And for now, Jin-soo wanted her to keep believing that. Because the most devastating blow is never the one you see coming. It's the one that arrives after you've already started celebrating your victory. Meanwhile, back at Haeundae Kitchen, Amara was finishing her shift on a Tuesday night. The restaurant was nearly empty. The chef had gone home an hour ago. Amara was wiping down the last tables, moving through the quiet space with the kind of practiced ease that comes from doing the same thing hundreds of times. She hadn't seen Taekyung in 5 days. She noticed the absence the way she noticed everything, quietly without drawing attention to it. He simply wasn't coming anymore. The tray went straight from the kitchen to the back room without stopping. The soup arrived clean. The man in the back room ate his meal and left, the same way he always did. Amara didn't know what had happened to Taekyung. She didn't know that he was in a room somewhere answering questions. She didn't know that the man in the back room had figured everything out. She didn't know any of the larger story that was unfolding around her. All she knew was that the poison had stopped, and the man in the back room was still alive. She finished wiping the tables, hung up her apron, and walked out into the Seoul night. The city was loud and bright and indifferent to her, the way it always was. She walked to the subway, rode it back to Mapogu, and let herself into the apartment she shared with 2 women who didn't ask about her day. She made tea. She sat by the window, and she watched the city lights for a while, thinking about nothing in particular before she went to bed. She had done what she could. The rest wasn't her story to tell. But here is what Amara didn't know. She didn't know that by saving Jin-soo's life, by making that quiet, an invisible decision to swap the bowl night after night, she had set into motion a chain of events that would dismantle one of the wealthiest women in Seoul. She didn't know that Jin-soo would eventually find out what she had done. She didn't know that the man she had been carrying soup to every night would one day look at her and see not just a waitress, but the person who had kept him breathing long enough to destroy the woman who wanted him dead. None of that had happened yet, but it would, and it wasn't over. Because Jin-soo Park was not a man who let things end quietly, and Yuna Park was about to learn what it meant to be on the wrong side of someone with nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to make sure she felt every consequence of what she had done. The fall was coming. It was going to be painfully slow. Or complete. Jin-soo waited 2 weeks before he moved. 2 weeks of watching Yuna go about her life. 2 weeks of surveillance reports landing on Sung-ho's desk every morning. Where she went, who she spoke to, what she ordered at lunch, which lawyers she called, which bank branches she visited. 2 weeks of Yuna feeling completely safe, completely in control, completely convinced that the plan she had set in motion months ago was working exactly the way she had designed it. During those 2 weeks, she made 3 more moves to redirect Jin-soo's assets. Each one was quiet. Each one went through the channels she had spent months identifying and cultivating. She transferred the equivalent of $40 million across a network of shell companies that she believed were invisible to anyone outside her immediate circle of advisors. Well, she was wrong about that too. Jin-soo's people had been inside those networks for days before she made her first transfer. Every dollar she moved, they tracked. Every account she opened, they mapped. By the time the 2 weeks were up, Jinsu had a complete picture of everything Yuna had done. Not just the poisoning, but the financial dismantling she had been constructing alongside it. The poison was supposed to kill him. The money moves were supposed to make her rich. She had planned both tracks simultaneously, with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. It was impressive, in a cold way. Jinsu could almost respect it, if respect weren't so far removed from what he was feeling. On a Wednesday morning, Jinsu called a meeting, not a large one. Just him, Sung-ho, and 2 other men who handled the organization's financial infrastructure. They sat in a room above a dry cleaner in Unsam-dong, a nondescript space that Jinsu used for conversations that couldn't happen anywhere else. "Here's what's going to happen," Jinsu said. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. "We're going to freeze every account Yuna has access to, not just the ones she's been using to move money, all of them. Her personal accounts, her family's accounts, the trust she set up through her lawyers, everything connected to her name, directly or indirectly." Sung-ho nodded. He had expected this. "At the same time," Jinsu continued, "we're going to have a conversation with Yuna's lawyers. Not mine, hers, the ones she's been using to manage the transfers. Hey, we're going to make it very clear to them that they are accessories to attempted murder and financial fraud, and that if they don't cooperate fully and immediately, they will be treated accordingly." "And Yuna herself?" one of the other men asked. Jinsu paused. He looked at the table for a moment, and something moved across his face. Not anger, not satisfaction, something quieter and harder to name. "Yuna is going to be arrested," he said, "but not by us, by the police, by prosecutors, publicly, in broad daylight. I want this to happen in a way that every person in Seoul who has ever attended one of her charity galas or sat at one of her dinner parties sees exactly what she is." The room was quiet for a moment. "I want her to know before it happens that it's coming," Jinsu said. "I want her to see it approaching. I want her to have time to understand that there is nothing left she can do to stop it." He stood up. The meeting was over. The next 48 hours moved fast. Sung-ho's people froze the accounts first. It took less than an hour once the orders were given. Yuna's bank balances went to zero simultaneously across 6 different institutions. The shell companies she had used to move Jinsu's money were locked down by people who operated in the space between legitimate finance and the underworld. People who could shut down a financial network faster than any court order could. The lawyers were contacted next. 2 of them broke within the first hour. They provided full cooperation. Every document, every communication, every detail of the financial structure Yuna had asked them to build. And the 3rd lawyer held out for 6 hours before he too decided that self-preservation was more important than client confidentiality. By Thursday evening, the prosecutors had everything they needed. Jinsu arranged for Yuna to find out on a Friday morning. Not through a phone call, not through a lawyer, through the news. He had a contact at one of Seoul's major broadcast outlets. A reporter who owed him a favor and who knew better than to ask questions about where the tip had come from. The story ran at 7 in the morning. Wife of prominent Seoul businessman arrested on charges of attempted murder and large-scale financial fraud. The headline was precise. The details were damning. Photographs of Yuna being led out of her apartment building by plainclothes officers accompanied the broadcast. She was not wearing makeup. Her hair was not styled. It was the first time in years that anyone had seen her look like a person rather than a performance. Jinsu watched the broadcast from his apartment. He sat in the sparse living room, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he watched the footage of his wife being taken away from the life she had tried to steal from him. He didn't feel victorious. That surprised him a little. He had expected to feel something sharp and satisfying. The way it felt when an enemy was neutralized, when a threat was eliminated, when the machinery of his world did what it was designed to do. But what he actually felt was closer to exhaustion. A deep, bone-level tiredness that had nothing to do with the arsenic that had been slowly destroying his body for months, and everything to do with the fact that the person he had shared his life with had looked at him every single day and seen nothing but an obstacle between her and the money she wanted. He turned off the television. He finished his coffee, and then he picked up his phone and called Sung-ho. There's one more thing I need to do, Jinsu said. What's that? I need to find the waitress. Sung-ho knew immediately who he meant. The surveillance footage from Hyundai Kitchen had shown everything, including Amara's quiet interventions. Jin-Soo's people had reviewed the recordings as part of their investigation into the poisoning, and they had found the evidence of what she had done. The bowl swaps, the careful, invisible acts of sabotage against Taekyung's deliveries. Night after night, for weeks, a woman nobody paid attention to had been keeping Jin-Soo alive. Jin-Soo wanted to meet her. It took Sung-ho 2 days to locate Amara and arrange the meeting. He chose a neutral place, a small cafe in Hongdae. Nothing fancy, the kind of place where two people could sit across from each other without attracting notice. Amara arrived first. She sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and waited. She didn't know why she was there. Sung-ho had simply called the restaurant, asked for her by name, and told her that someone wanted to speak with her. He didn't say who. He didn't say why. He just gave her the address and the time. She was nervous. Not the kind of nervous that shows on the outside. Amara had spent years training herself not to show things on the outside, but the kind that sits in your chest and makes your breathing a little too careful. She didn't know what she had done wrong. She didn't know if the restaurant had found out about the bowl swaps. She didn't know if the man in the gray jacket had talked to someone. Jin-Soo walked in at exactly the time Sung-ho had specified. He saw her immediately, a young woman alone, watching the door with eyes that were trying very hard not to look worried. He walked over to her table and sat down without saying anything for a moment. Then he looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he hadn't looked at another person in years. "You saved my life," he said. Simple, flat, no emotion on the surface. Amara stared at him. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know his name. Not really, not the way it mattered. She knew him as the man in the back room, the man who ate soup every night, the man she had been quietly, invisibly protecting for weeks without ever knowing who he was or why it mattered. "I didn't know who you were," she said. Her Korean was careful, accented but precise. "I just knew something was wrong with the food." Jin-Soo nodded. He understood that. More than she probably realized, he understood exactly what it meant to act on instinct in a situation where the smart thing would have been to stay silent. "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to meet you, not to thank you. Although I am thanking you. I wanted to meet you because I wanted to see what kind of person does what you did." Amara didn't answer right away. She looked down at her tea, then back up at him. "The kind of person who doesn't like watching someone get hurt," she said. That's all it was. Jin-Soo studied her face for a long time. Then he nodded again. "That's everything," he said. They talked for another hour after that. Not about the poisoning or the arrest or any of the larger machinery of Jin-Soo's world. They talked about soul, about what it was like to live in a city that wasn't your own, about food, real food, the kind that meant something beyond nutrition, about the strange, quiet ways that people find each other in enormous cities without ever meaning to. When they parted, Jin-Soo didn't offer Amara money. He didn't offer her a job or protection or anything that came attached to his world. And he simply shook her hand and told her that if she ever needed anything at all, she should call the number Sung-ho would give her. Amara took the number. She thanked him. And she walked out of the cafe and back into Seoul, back into the life she had been living before any of this happened. And she carried the encounter with her the way you carry something small and heavy, quietly, without showing it to anyone. Jin-Soo sat alone at the table for a while after she left. The cafe was nearly empty. The afternoon light was coming through the windows in long, flat strips. He sat there and thought about what had happened. Not the poisoning, not the arrest, not the financial warfare. He thought about a woman who had no reason to help him and had helped him anyway, who had made a choice in a hallway in the back of a restaurant, was that had nothing to do with power or money or self-interest, just a human being who saw something wrong and decided not to look away. It was the most honest thing anyone had done for him in years. He left the cafe and drove back to his apartment. The city was moving around him the way it always moved, fast and different, full of people living their lives without knowing or caring about anyone else's story. Jin-Soo watched it pass by through the car window, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something that was close to peace. Not because his enemy had been defeated, not because the money was safe, or the threat was gone, or the machinery of his world had protected him the way it was designed to. He felt peace because somewhere in the noise of this enormous city, there was a woman who had carried a bowl of clean soup to a stranger's table, again and again, without ever asking for anything in return. And that, in a life built on transactions and power and the careful management of trust, was the closest thing to grace he had ever been given. Una Park was convicted 14 months later. The trial was public, televised, and brutally thorough. She received a sentence of 22 years. Her family's reputation, which had taken generations to build, was reduced to ash within weeks of the arrest. The money she had tried to steal was never recovered in full. Most of it had been frozen before it could be moved far enough to disappear entirely. What remained went back to Jinsu's networks, which continued to operate in the quiet, invisible way they always had. Ha Tae-kyung received a shorter sentence in return. He had cooperated fully. He disappeared after his release into the kind of anonymity that men in his position always disappear into. Gone, forgotten, a name that no one in the story would ever speak again. Jinsu continued living the way he had always lived. Quietly, carefully, he moved to a different apartment, still in Gangnam, still sparse, still overlooking the city, and he ate at Hyundai Kitchen most nights, in the same private room, ordering the same meal. The chef never found out about the poisoning, the restaurant never changed, the routine held, and Amara kept working there, 5 nights a week, carrying trays and wiping tables and going home at 11 o'clock. She and Jinsu never spoke again after that afternoon in Hongdae. They didn't need to. Some things simply don't require conversation to be understood. The moral of this story is not that good always defeats evil, because that is not how the world works. The moral is about attention. It is about the fact that the people who scheme and manipulate and destroy others almost always assume they are the only ones watching. They build their plans around the belief that no one else is paying close enough attention to see what they are doing. And most of the time, they are right. Most of the time, the people around them are too busy, too distracted, too focused on their own survival to notice the slow, quiet damage being done in the background. But not always. Sometimes there is someone who sees, someone who has no stake in the outcome, no personal gain to be made, no reason whatsoever to intervene, and who intervenes anyway. Not because they are a hero, not because they expect gratitude or recognition or reward, simply because they saw something wrong and they could not bring themselves to look away. That is not a rare quality, but it is a quiet one, and the world runs on it more than most people will ever know. The real lesson here is actually simple. Never assume you are the only one paying attention, because somewhere in a hallway, in a kitchen, in a life you will never intersect with again, someone is watching, and they might just be the reason you are still alive.